Shalom, shalom to everyone watching on the Ways of Israel. This is Rabbi Moshe Otero. I want to first of all wish every fellow Jew a Lashana Tova, and may you be inscribed only for life and good and health in this coming year 5783. Now, as we are heading towards this new year, we look forward for a positive initiation. May Hashem bless every single one of us with all the good and all of His Rahmanis, mercy, forgiveness in every area of our lives. As I was looking at what's taking place in our country here and how the President of these United States of America have misused his power by putting in harm's way the military, and in order to be able to expedite their withdrawal, he lost a lot of lives. He lost a lot of, you might say, military armaments that cost us billions of dollars. He didn't pay it out of his own pocket, even though he may have it. He paid it off the pockets of Americans. Now, there's a question that arises, and we need to really ask this question now in this time in which the persons involved in manipulating and commanding the military are people who have no regards to life, to God, to those upper echelon morals that this country has always operated or attempted to operate. So there is an incredible article that appears in Rabbi Mark Angel's issue. It was an issue that text or in his Institute for Jewish Ideas Conversations, issue number 15, the winter of 2013 or 5773, which is an article I highly recommend you read if you have an access to that, written by Moshe SOKOLOW. Now, Moshe SOKOLOW is the Associate Dean and holds a Fania Godensfeld Heller Chair at the Israeli Graduate School of Jewish Education. He's also involved in the administration of Yeshiva University. And based on the lessons of Nehemiah Leibowitz, and published widely his biblical scholarship in pedagogy and history of Jewish education, his current research interest in the habit of religious education, both Jewish and Muslim. And obviously, what he wrote is of great interest to me, being that I'm looking at our world heading towards a united world conflict in the Middle East eventually. As we all know, we're told by our sages and even a lot of the writings that the nations of the world will gather to unite against Israel. And obviously there's going to be a lot of military people involved in actions that are completely counter Jewish principles and really attack Jews in general. And looking at this point, there is this idea of a conscience. So I'm going to read a couple of this, and hopefully I'll add to this during the weeks of interval, because we need to ask ourselves, can we disobey military orders if you're in the military? And there is a biblical, Talmudic, MIDRASHIC, and even exegetical analysis of an all too contemporary question, which Moshe SOKOLOW responds to this article. And with permission, I'm going to be citing a lot of his statements there, because I think it's well worth reviewing this, especially in the middle of where we're having the problems of misuse of our military. From time immemorial, he writes in his prologue, soldiers on the front lines have borne the burden of carrying out orders that are issued by senior officials from the relative safety of the rear echelon. When those orders are illegal or ambiguous in moral nature, just think of Nuremberg and Mr. Lai, who bears the responsibility of the consequences. This article, which is written in this edition, is adapted unabashedly from the thoughtful article of the late Professor Moshe Greenberg of the Hebrew University, a renowned scholar of the Tanakh and of the Pashanut and the Near Eastern, entitled Rabbinic Reflection on Defying Illegal Orders. In his writing, Menachem Kellner, Contemporary Jewish Ethics, he has added sources there to include this pedagogical pedagogical adaptation of the entire art original, and he alone bears the responsibility of the conclusions herein. Now, a word about the methodology that Moshe SOKOLOW utilizes in this article. Our sages describe highly selective nature of biblical history as nevuah shechutkarecha ledorot, prophecy that is required for eternity. This is according to the Babylonian Talmud in Megillah 14:8. According to the principle of those events were to have everlasting meaning and application, and they were recorded in the Tanakh, whereas other ostensibly more idiosyncratic events were omitted. In other words, prophetic foresight enables us to draw not just to inspiration, but practical advice from the deeds and, yes, the misdeeds of our ancestors. So we got to learn from previous mistakes in order to apply it in today's world. Just as the Talmudic sages and medieval exegetes judged the evidence of biblical text and applied it to their own circumstances, so too must we evaluate the evidence we seek. Sometimes our situation are sufficiently similar to that what we can adopt in their suggestion wholesale. At other times, he writes, that despite the overall sameness in our underlying human condition, we can take the suggestion that only as foundation upon which we must construct our own edifice, and I trust that I have built prudently. I believe he has, and this is why I'm sharing it with you today. In his synopsis, as King David lies dying in 1 Kings chapter 2, he instructs his Solomon to set old scores with Yoav ben Zeruiah. That was in verse 5. And Shimi ben Gera, verse 8, where Joab hears that Adonijah, whose candidacy for king he supported in 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 7, and has failed to secure the throne, he realizes that his life is forfeit and seeks sanctuary in the tent. This is the tent of protection, refuge. He is brought before the king Solomon, charged with murder of Abner ben Ner, 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 27, and Amasa ben Yeter. According to the Peshat of the book of Kings, Yoav is immediately and unceremoniously executed by Benayu ben Yoyada, verse 34. Talmudic Haggadah, however, has Solomon bringing Yoav to trial, where he successfully defends himself against both murder charges. Instead, he eventually is executed on the third charge, namely his collaboration in an unsuccessful coup staged by Adonijah. The core of this essay is an examination of Yoav's defense, in which the elements of obedience to the order of a superior officer plays a pivotal role. So we have the first exhibit number 1, and where we have Joab's trial, and we read that in Sanhedrin chapter 49, verse 49a. And we read, and Solomon brought Joab to trial and said to him, "Why did you kill Abner?" And he replied, "I was avenging my brother Asael." Wasn't Asael in pursuit of Abner? Abner could have saved himself by wounding Asael in one of his limbs, and he needed not have killed him. Perhaps he was not able to do so, since Abner was able to strike him at the 5th rib. He could just have wounded him. Solomon said, "Let us leave the subject of Abner." "Why did you kill Amasa?" Yoav replied, "Because Amasa committed treason against the king." The king David ordered Amasa to summon all the men of Yehudah in 3 days' time, and Amasa went to summon them and tarried. This we read in 2 Samuel chapter 20, verse 4. And Solomon said to Amasa construed that buts and onlys, and he found that them engaged in religious study and reason. The Israelites promised Joshua, "Whoever contradicts you or disobeys you, whatever you command shall die." Joshua chapter 1, verse 18. Does that include a disagreement on the account of Torah study? The verse says only, "Rak, be firm and resolute," verse 5. So why was Yoav executed? He was a traitor, as it states. The news reached Joab, and he had sided with Adonijah, although not with Absalom, 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 28. Now let's take a little bit of the elaboration that Moshe SOKOLOW brings out. The right of a leader to expect obedience to his instructions is not granted expressly in the Torah. It derives from a specific historical precedent. And after the death of Moses, the Israelites swore their allegiance to Joshua and promised to punish any disobedience to his command. This pledge, however, was not a blank check. Though this reference is only to be firm and resolute, rak hazak va'ematz, the buts and the only cited above, they reveal to us our first important insight into the halachot obedience. The halachot of obedience. A leader expressly prohibited from requiring obedience in violation of Torah law. Note, the Talmud accepts Joab's claim vis-a-vis Abner, but rejects his claim against Amasa by justifying Amasa's delay. Nevertheless, it prosecutes Joab on separate charges of treason. The conclusion appears to be that while he was morally guilty vis-a-vis Abner and Amasa, he was not legally capable. Now we're going to take a look at the Exhibit 2 that Moshe SOKOLOW presents in this argument. Abner and Amasa, ironically, plays a critical role in the Talmudic derivation of halakhic principle of obedience to order. In 1 Samuel chapter 22, verse 17, Shaul commands his servants to kill the Kohanim, the Cohens of Nob. The Cohens of Nob, because they had aided and abetted David in his escape. The soldiers refuses to shed the blood of the servants of the Lord, so shall Saul turn the task over to Doeg the Edomite, who has no such complication, and kills them. In the Talmud Yerushalmi say in Sanhedrin 29a, he asks, who were those servants who refused the order? Rabbi Samuel ben Isaac said, and they were Abner and Amasa, and they said to Saul, if you were anything besides these belts and coats, the uniform and insignia, take them back. The Talmud in Talmud Bavali, Sanhedrin 28, however, has certain reservations about them, and their conduct in particular. Rabbi Yehuda said in Rav's name, why did Abner meet an untimely death? Because he failed to take a stand against Saul. Rabbi Isaac said he took a stand, but he was overruled. Take a look at the elaboration that Moshe SOKOLOW gives. Abner's death at the hands of Joab is just deserved for his failure to assume a more rigorous opposition to the murder of the Kohanim of Nob. This provides us with a second important insight into the halachot of obedience. It may not be sufficient to abstain from obeying an illegal order. You might have to offer more than your resignation. Indeed, the Talmud in Shabbat 55a, in elaborating on Ezekiel chapter 9, verse 4, go through the streets in Jerusalem and place a mark on the foreheads of all who sigh and groan over the abominations committed in her, makes that point that it is not enough just to refrain from committing evil, when one can also take a determined stand against it. Now, very important. Morality does play a part even in the viciousness of war or as a soldier. Even the Agadic penchant of validating the aphorism according to the measure that one metes out, so he is meted out to him, we should not be surprised to discover that the disobedience that goes around comes around. The same Talmudic passage which we began in Sanhedrin chapter 49a continues, and God brought Joab guilt down upon his head for having struck down two more righteous and better than he, Abner and Amasa, better in that they construed but the buts and the onlys while he did not, more righteous in that they refused the command that came orally while he obeyed a command that came in writing. And we're going to look at this elaboration, and we'll continue this, the fourth exhibit, in another video. And more righteous than they, the command that they came orally, and while he obeyed them, commanded them in writing. Whereas Abner and Amasa defied a questionable command, by virtue of the verbal nature, it carried an inherent note of ambiguity. Thereby they could have provided them with a cover should they have chosen to obey it. Joab failed to defy a written order, which contains no such uncertainty, and therefore offers no acceptable alternative to disobedience, to place Uriah the Hittite in the front line of fire. So we're going to take a look at the fourth exhibit that Moshe SOKOLOW presents, and has to do with crime and agency. And we will continue this in the following video, but I think it's very important because it brings about major issues regarding disobedience against a military order. Shalom, shalom, and we will continue this thought.